Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Green Book Pod, produced in association with Lib Dem Pod. This time we're looking at health policy. If you listened to any of our previous podcasts, you'll know that our aim is to explore the major challenges facing the country and to discuss what the Liberal Democrat response should be with both external experts and party insiders. My name is Duncan Brack. 11 years ago, I was part of the team that wrote the Green Book, New Directions for Liberals in Government. We aim to contribute to the debate about the challenges facing the next Parliament and the need for innovative solutions that the Liberal Democrats could adopt. The political context is obviously now very different, but our belief remains that there is a massive opportunity for Liberal Democrats to set out an agenda to make a real difference, but only by identifying innovative, radical, and robust solutions with realistic strategies to deliver. So, with that introduction, I'll hand over to my colleague, Robin Stafford.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast on the subject of health. The NHS is at the top of most voters' priorities with concerns about access to GPs, waiting lists, and a sense that it has been starved of funds and resources. However, there is another aspect, which is the very poor levels of health of an ageing British population that drives demand on the NHS. Sometimes described as a national sickness or a national treatment service rather than a national health service. As multiple reports have shown, the UK population's health compares badly with other similar countries, and it has much wider economic and social impacts, not least the number of people unable to work because of health issues. There are multiple factors driving ill health, most of which lie outside the NHS itself, which just has to pick up the pieces. That makes it a particular challenge to tackle, but unless we tackle it, demand on the NHS will grow unmanageably. Fortunately, we have two guests today who've been developing a book on the subject, which they refer to as the elephant in the room. So let me introduce our panel. Chairing the session, we have Norman Lamb. Norman has been a health minister and was a Lib Dem MP. He now chairs the South London and Maudsley NHS Trust, and is the co-chair of the Health Devolution Commission. Wendy Taylor brings a perspective from inside the NHS, having been an oncology consultant for many years. However, she's also a councillor in Newcastle City and is currently the chair of the Health and Social Care Committee. She has a long-standing interest in public health and the importance of integrating health and social care. Roy Lilley and Ed Smith are our two who have been working together on a book. Roy describes himself as a health policy analyst, writer, broadcaster, and commentator on the NHS. He's been the vice chairman of a health authority and the chair of an NHS trust, as well as teaching at both Imperial College and Nottingham University. He runs a very lively blog, which I'd recommend subscribing to. Ed Smith was chair of NHS Improvement and deputy chair of NHS England. He now supports a number of health organisations, along with other advisory roles in the UK health economy. He chaired Birmingham Health Partners, a collaboration between higher education and the NHS in West Midlands. But that's enough of the introductions. Let me hand over to Norman to kick us off.
Thanks a lot, Robin, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and I'd love to get the panel's perspective on where we're going wrong, the scale of the problem, why it appears as if we're so much worse in terms of sickness than many other developed economies, and then what we do about it. So perhaps I could start with you, Ed. What's your perspective on the state of things now? We talk about a national sickness service. Where are we going wrong, and what do we need to do about it?
Yeah. I mean, the principal challenge, of course, is the NHS is the recipient of everything else that's going wrong in our society and with our people. And, you know, let me start by saying I think the NHS is fantastic. And when you look at the advancements of science for early identification and treatment, it's amazing what we are going to see coming down the pipe in terms of the ability to treat illness and sickness. But some of that will in itself lead to more demand. And what we're just seeing is increasing demand for healthcare caused by A, the advancement of science, but B, the collapse of many of the other components. And to be honest, I mean, I've reread Marmot a couple of times in the last year or so. And most of it was in the Marmot review 14 years ago, where he talked with a group,
and indeed Derek Wanless, Ed, I guess
Wanless in 2004. But Marmot pointed out education, environment, food chain, social deprivation, and the link between social inequality and health inequality is massive. So those are the things that Roy and I are really interested in looking to solutions. And it requires, from the top of government, but all the way through, in my judgment, to a much more revisited local community integration of activity than we've had. And I'll come back to local authority.
I love to hear you saying that, Ed. Do you have any sense as to what all of this is costing the NHS? I mean, what is the cost of the sickness that we have in our society?
So the direct cost of diabetes, 2011 was direct and indirect cost of diabetes. 2011 was 23 billion. It's forecast by 2035 to be 40 billion. The cost of mental health, 18-19 was 12.5 billion, projected in 23-24 to be 17 billion. The cost to the UK of mental health in terms of economic activity, 117 billion. These numbers are large numbers by any stretch of the imagination. And my personal belief is tackling them at root cause and dealing with the root causes will ultimately not only create a fairer and better society, but will definitely have economic and social.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely get that. And I see it particularly in terms of mental health. The level of the burden of mental ill health in our society has enormous economic cost. Wendy, you've been working in the front line of the NHS all your adult working life. And I'm sure you see the consequences of our failure to confront the need to prevent ill health more effectively. What's your perspective on this?
I mean, I certainly think the NHS is currently on its knees, and it's due to partly lack of funding, but also the failure to deal with the very issues that Michael Marmot brought to our attention so many years ago. I was listening to Sir Michael the other day, and he came up with a lovely phrase that he said, people need the freedom to live a life they have reason to value. And he has very clear principles about how we can get there. And what we need to do is allow local councils and public health to sort out the social determinants of health. And yet the government's cut funding by 26%. Life expectancy has fallen. A shocking statistic I heard the other day was that smoking amongst our most deprived adults has actually increased in the last 6 years from 29% to 33%, compared to 12.9% in the overall in the UK. So we're failing our deprived communities completely. We really need to talk to them, find out what they think we can do to help. You talked about cost, and just to give a local's perspective on that, smoking in Newcastle is estimated by Ash to cost 233 million per year. And most of that is loss of productivity due to ill health and people being unable to work, but also obviously quite a lot for social care and the health costs of it.
And Wendy, we'll come back to this, I think, in a moment, but there's also a big health inequality issue there, isn't there? Because
exactly.
of smoking rates being much higher amongst poorer communities.
Yeah, indeed, very much so.
Well, thank you. Roy, you've been observing this whole scene for very many years. Give us your perspective on what's going wrong and how you would like to see us respond.
Okay, well, yeah, you're right. I have. And when Ed and I wrote our first book, we realized pretty soon that the first book is 200 questions for the NHS, and it's not telling people how to fix their problems. It's a question of it's a sort of a book of provocation, really, to get people talking about it.
That doesn't sound like you, Roy.
Surely not. But we realized that really we were writing a rubbish book, because actually it's had 30,000 downloads since we wrote it. But we realized that this was all pointless unless we could figure out a way of stopping people getting sick in the first place.
Yeah, totally.
And of course, almost everything that's ever been done in that tray, in that file, has failed. Most of public health initiatives, and I say this, with much love for public health people, and it's not a criticism of a profession, it's a criticism of a situation we find ourselves in, that most public health initiatives have failed. I mean, if you look at what's happened at the inoculation of kids with measles, I mean, how the hell did that happen? It's a no-brainer that that's what we should be doing, but somehow or other it's kind of slipped through our fingers, and now everybody's panicking and running around thinking, well, what the hell do we do about it? And if you say, well, what the hell do we do about it? Well, we do what they do in Australia. They say, you don't have to get your kids vaccinated if you don't want to, but by the way, you can't send them to school, you can't get childcare, and we won't give you any welfare benefits, but it's up to you.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting conversation, which I want to return to a little later. Just before we come on to talk a bit more about the factors that are driving ill health, and also, I would say, health inequalities as well. I was just struck, Wendy, by your quote from Michael Marmot, and I'm paraphrasing, but he was essentially saying freedom to lead a good life.
That's right.
And for me, that's very much a sort of liberal principle, that we should be liberating people to enjoy life and to live life to the full, and to be, of course, economically productive. And we're failing very much to achieve that, aren't we?
I mean, I would argue against that, saying that public health initiatives have never worked, because you've only got to look at smoking. And I was involved in a webinar on this the other day. In 1982, 50% of the population smoked. We're now down to 12.9%, and most of that has been achieved by government legislation. So banning cigarette sales to children, stopping smoking in public places, denormalizing smoking.
That's exactly what we say in the book. We get to the very nutty problem of what is the role of government in all this, and what will the public stand for. And I think the role is much bigger than we think. Ed and I would argue that the public are up for a lot more of things like that.
So in other words, confronting this idea that it's just the nanny state.
Yes.
Actually, it's ways of enabling people to live a good life.
I mean, I did struggle with the idea of raising the age at which people could buy cigarettes, because it's a very illiberal thing to tell adults that they're not allowed to do something. But on the other hand, we really have to get rid of the most preventable cause of ill health in our country.
Can I just address a little bit further this whole issue of the factors that are driving ill health? Ed, how do you see this? I mean, I guess we're talking about the things that Michael Marmot talks about: poor housing, lack of employment, poverty, poor environment. Are these the factors that we need to focus on if we're to shift to a more preventive approach?
Yeah, we think there are a 6 or 7. Let me just raise a couple. I mean, firstly, levels of obesity in this country have gone from 21% in 2000 to 26% in 2021. But in the most deprived areas, they're at 31% compared to 13% in the least deprived. So there is a huge implication on morbidity, multiple morbidity, coming from obesity alone. And then you look at the root causes to that. Some of it is around the food chain, and we need to tackle the food chain and super processed foods. There's a lot of narrative about that. Yeah. How you do that, the food lobby is very strong, but it's damaging people's living a good life and their health. Housing, and in particular the state of socially deprived housing in this country. I remember when I was chairing the NHS being told so much accommodation doesn't have a cooker, doesn't have a thing, it just has a microwave. And you know, that militates against healthy food. Education, the amount of sport played in schools is meant to be 2 hours a week. A third of schools in this country are not even providing that. What's happened to sport and physical activity in our early year and secondary education? You know, they're just 3 things that need to be tackled as a collective both some at the national level, but particularly, and I reinforce this, and I think you agree, Norman, at the local level. And I want to come back to local involvement and local collaborative leadership as we get through this.
Yeah, we need to sign you up to the Health Devolution Commission, Ed, because this is at the heart of our message, that this can't be directed from Whitehall. It will never succeed. There are things you can do nationally, but ultimately we have to empower communities to confront these big challenges. Roy, do you share the view? Sorry, Ed, come in.
Can I just, because it was your patch, and Roy and I talked about it, and I just happened to be listening to Radio 4 earlier in the week about Nourishing Norfolk, which is the most fantastic collaborative around business, around the county council, local community, local authorities, volunteers, in providing not just food, but actually helping with financial advice, employment advice, cooking advice. That's the type of thing that if we replicated Nourishing Norfolk 1,000 times across the country, they have access 10,000 people on their own. You're scaling up something at the local level, which is a fantastic impact. So sorry to do that.
No, Ed, you don't need to apologise. I'm delighted that you're highlighting something really positive in Norfolk, and a shout out to the Norfolk Community Foundation, which has led all of that brilliant work. Roy, do you agree that there is also, alongside these social determinants of health, enormous health inequalities in our country?
Well, yes, I mean, you can't disagree, can you? And in 1998, I went to Scotland to the Craigmillar estate, where the local authority had given a council house over to the local community. They'd turned it into an office, a place where people learned to type. They learned to get to write CVs. They dug the garden up outside and planted spuds, and they were giving them away to the people who lived there. I mean, we know what to do. We know there's no lack of knowledge, no lack of data, no lack of desire. There's a lack of how the hell do we do this? And you have to make it happen. And Wendy was right. It's the law, and this is not a very liberal thing to say, and everybody's going to have a heart attack and they won't sleep tonight, but it's the law that makes things happen. Seatbelts in cars, crash helmets on motorbikes, smoking in the workplace, health and safety legislation.
But also, Roy, can I just ask, you described a beautiful example there, and a Bromley by Bow in London is another great example of, combining primary care with employment guidance, advice, getting people with mental ill health to get involved in gardening and all sorts of things that give them a bit of meaning in life, training for employment. How do we spread this best practice as well? The NHS isn't great at sharing and spreading best practice. Do you have any advice as to how we can do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, for years now, I've run a not-for-profit organisation called the Academy of Fabulous Stuff, where people in the NHS share their good stuff for free. 2,000 people a day look at it, and we've got thousands and thousands of examples of good stuff. Some of it's clinical, some of it's management, some of it's in the public health arena. My point with all this is, as I've just said, there is no lack of knowing what we should do. It's how do we make it happen? And Ed and I in the book, we get to something called the zone of wellness. So we stop talking about public health and we start talking about wellness. And if you can imagine a Venn diagram, there are 4 circles that interlink. 1 is supportive technologies. Number 2 is collaborative leadership. And 3 is benign legislation. And 4 is public acceptance. And if you can put those things together, you create in the middle of it all a zone of wellness, which is what we are trying to talk about. Because we can talk about all the good stuff until we're blue in the face, and we know 60% of presentations into primary care are in some way lifestyle related. Okay, what do we do as a government to do the greatest good for the greatest number, to look after people, to have healthier lives? Now, the Secretary of State for Health this morning in the Times newspaper said, and I've got it here somewhere, I'll just very quickly tell you what she said. Now, they're going to put £430 million of new investment into the NHS app. with new services available to ensure we as a nation feel healthier by the summer. I mean, I give up. We're led by idiots. I mean, she's the sugar plum fairy of politics. Yeah. Total bloody rubbish. What we have to figure out is what are we going to do? Now, I'll give you an example of what we did, and it worked. It was George Osborne that did it, and you won't like me saying that, but he introduced the sugar levy, right? Now, the sugar levy wasn't a tax. It's called a sugar tax. And he said to the soft drinks industry, if you want to keep bunging sugar and stuff and rotting our kids' teeth, that's fine. But it's going to cost them like, £10 a bottle. If you want to put something, if you want to reformulate it so it tastes as good and doesn't rot our teeth, I'm not going to tax you. Guess what? Overnight, boom, they found a way to reformulate sugary drinks. We couldn't tell the difference. Their sales didn't go down. And the money, well, there wasn't any money because nobody produced sugary drinks anymore. But so if you think about
Roy, could I just ask you, did it have any impact on obesity and on levels of obesity amongst children?
No, because there's a much bigger piece of work to do around obesity. Obesity is about mums on a fixed income with kids who are hungry, going to bed hungry, going to the chip shop, buying a bag of chips because it fills them up with carbohydrates. So is that about chips fattening people? No, it's not. It's about poverty fattening people. It's about poor mums not knowing what to do. So you have to go all the way back and find the root cause. That's why this is all very short-sighted.
So look, Roy, you've beautifully sort of introduced the issue that I was going to come on to, which is what do we now do about it? And you said this is what we've got to work out. We've got a general election this year. We'll likely have a new government coming in. What should be on the agenda in terms of actions, initiatives, policies to move the dial on improving the health of this nation, thereby in turn reducing the pressure on the NHS, but ultimately, going back to what Wendy said, improving the lives of people across our country. What is the agenda that we should be following?
Two things: jobs and poverty. You fix that, you fix almost everything. It had nothing to do with the NHS. The NHS is like the dust cart that follows the Lord Mayor's show of life, shoveling up the horse's doo-doo. It's nothing to do with the NHS. Ed and I agree that the NHS is the NHS. Get on and fix people up. We have to fix society, and that's about jobs and work. And work. I mean, there are three things for the three pillars of public health: a decent job, a safe place to live, and to love the person you want to love. You do those three things and we improve society. So if I was the Prime Minister, and who knows, you never know, I mean, your nightmare might come true, I would be saying, right, I'm looking for jobs and poverty. Fix those two things and you fix almost everything. But of course, we've got the department of this and the department of, yourself, you've got siloed departments. You've worked in health, you can see what it is. And if you look at West Streeting, the garbage he's talking about transferring services out of hospital into primary care. We don't have the staff, we don't have the buildings, we don't have the kit, and we don't have the money for the double running costs that make that happen. And he doesn't learn the lessons of the Darcy centres, the Blair years when we tried to do it. I mean, they just won't learn the lessons of the past. That's the problem. So to answer your question, it's about jobs and poverty.
Brilliant. Beautifully succinct. Wendy,
I wouldn't leave out housing in that equation, because poor housing is also a cause of very poor health. And we've had a good project locally where we've actually been giving people money who have chronic lung disease to heat their homes. And it does greatly reduce the number of people going into hospital. So it's a simple thing you can do locally. But I think there's a lot of other local initiatives, because, sorting out poverty and jobs is really a job for local government, for central government. But local government can do quite a few things. And to give us some examples, I got my local primary school to introduce the Daily Mile. Now, it's a very simple thing. The kids go out, they run, they walk for a mile a day. They love it. They come back with better concentration. They get the habit at a very early age of exercise. And it really is changing people's mindsets in that way that you can start to make some progress.
Can I just tell you, Wendy, can I just tell you a story? This is before COVID. I went on a visit about this mile thing, and it's very good. And I went to 3 schools, and I got to the first school, and they had the local paper there. And they said, "Oh, Mr. Lilley, you'll probably want to do a mile with the kids, won't you? While we, So I said, "Yeah, okay." So I did a mile with these kids. Right? I came back, I was knackered. Did the interview, went off to the next place, and they said, "Oh, Mr. Lilley, so the kids are very excited. Why don't you do the mile with us?" I did that. And then I got to the third one. I crawled around. I'm not a great fan of the mile.
No, it does seem to work, but we've also
Wendy, could I just we'll come back to the local in a moment, because
sure, okay, fair enough.
Fundamentally, totally with you on that. But just imagine for a moment you were the new Secretary of State for Health, perhaps with a broader remit, because we've talked about how it needs to be action outside the NHS. But what would you be advocating in a new government to start to shift the dial towards preventing ill health?
I mean, certainly reversing the cuts in public health. I mean, we need a lot more money into public health if we're going to actually get this prevention agenda on the way. And you'll know the levels have fallen by something like 26% since 2015. We need to restore that to back, preferably even more. We need to sort out housing. I mean, the fact that we've been waiting for proper building regulations for so long, and we're still building houses that are totally inadequate, is just crazy. We need to make sure that there's access to good quality food. And one of the problems I have with food banks is they're doing their best to help all these people who really need it, but it's tinned food, it's pasta, it's tomato sauces. They don't get the fresh food. They don't get access to cheap fresh food that we need. And there may be something government can do about that. And all the recommendations from the Cllr review on smoking, I would want to implement.
Brilliant. Ed, give us your prescription. First of all, we'll deal with the local in a moment, but what a national government could do to move the dial here.
I've been lucky to experience a whole range of different government departments: health, Department for Transport, international development, education, business. And I start from the challenge that each individual department has, first and foremost, its own ambition, its own requirements, its own priorities. And the new government has to start with, what are we trying to do as a country around the space of social deprivation, inequality, and wellness. And that requires a rethink of how the national government works. It shouldn't work on a silo by silo departmental basis. And if I were there, I would be saying, let's talk about the cross-government things first, and then the activities to deliver that cross-government activity. And I don't see that. I haven't seen that in the 20 years I've been involved. Some of it was there in the Blair years. We need to get back to that, Norman, I think, and that's where I would start. And then I would say, to get this thing done, and I know that's where you're going, we need to devolve so much of this into local communities and the leadership groups around those local communities, not try and do it from Westminster.
And Ed, would you devolve tax raising powers as well? We are about the most centralised country in Europe in terms of where the money is raised. And it seems to me that you only really give power to localities if they have some control over the finances, rather than always going to the centre to beg for it.
Yeah, I've moved to some European countries do it. America does it. They raise local and state taxes for use in their particular environment. I would do that. I would do some hypothecation of national tax, not keep a general taxation thing. And just going back to your earlier point, I would not put any of this responsibility for wellness at the hands of the Secretary of State for Health.
Yeah.
I just think it's, as Roy said, health is health. In this part of it, it spreads across. But let's put this somewhere else at a Secretary of State for Wellness sounds terrible, but put it at the door of the Prime Minister, put it at number one responsibility. Because if we don't fix it, our society is going to crash and burn, both economically and society, and in terms of the critical binding together of our society. You can already see it. You see that.
Can I just ask, Ed? It seems clear that we have a bigger problem than most other European countries in this regard. I mean, the data on the numbers of people out of work through mental ill health is much worse in the UK than elsewhere in Europe. Do you think that's down to the fact that we have a more unequal society than most of the rest of Europe, or do you think there are other factors at play?
I don't think we have a more or less unequal society. I mean, you go to France, you go to Spain, high youth unemployment, a lot of deprivation. You look at, I mean, maybe the Nordics are in a different place, but I think my view of what's going on in some significant parts of Spain is there's far greater community activity.
Yeah.
Far greater. And it's joyous to see communities come together to solve.
Though it's this central stranglehold in the UK that is to blame for much of this. I feel it becomes a dependency culture that localities can't take control and do stuff because they always have to seek permission from the centre.
Well, and also, I'm a businessman, and in the whole communication hierarchy of running large businesses, who do you listen to most? Not the C-suite. You listen to the next person up, the person that's got direct responsibility, the person closest to you. And so the top of a corporate organization has to be very careful about the 3 or 4 things it does, and then allow the ecosystem which it's presiding over to actually get the stuff done with its customers, with its suppliers, and with its employees. So
you're saying that the most successful companies are the ones that devolve power to a locality level and to empower people to make a difference. Very interesting. Roy, you want to come in?
Possibly, Norman? Just to say that was shown really well during COVID, when the local directors of public health were not allowed to take action on their own. They had to keep waiting for the government to tell them what they were supposed to do. And I think we would have had a far better situation if our local directors of public health had actually been able to implement the measures that they thought were best, rather than waiting for central government all the time.
Yeah, absolutely,
I
Wendy.
think that's very true, Wendy. Look, I mean, at the moment now, we're trying to get people together through the ICBs, and it's turning out into one great big cost shifting exercise, and it's a waste of time. It's never going to work. And I think there is an opportunity here to make something happen. Jeremy Hunt said, as a kind of a throwaway line in the budget the other day, that he was thinking about what can we do to get rid of national insurance? Well, you can't get rid of national insurance because we need the money. So you've got to find that money from somewhere. Now, you could call it income tax. Actually, we could. That does open a window if we're thinking about where money comes from. It does open a window for some kind of local taxation to take over that or part of that gap created by national insurance. And this business about local leadership, one of our circles in our Venn diagram, and I'll show you that was the thinking for the book on a piece of paper. That was how it started. I'm going to keep that and frame it. But that was. I promise you that's true. We sat down and I drew that. When we were in Spain, actually, when we started to work on this book, and we were in a place called, how do you pronounce it, Ed? Benavis. Benavis, that's it. There's an H in it, which isn't pronounced, and I don't quite, but anyway, it's Benavis. And we were in the car, and we were going back to where it was. We were going back for lunch, and we got stuck in the traffic. Right. Now, what was happening was that there's a road. On this side of the road, there's a playing field and a school. And on this side of the road, there's a bigger school. And at lunchtime, they bring 2 barriers down, bomb, either end of the road, and all the kids cross the road very safely and go in and have lunch in the dining room in the bigger school. Now, we looked into that. Now, that required funding. It required the highways people. It required the school. It required consent because the mayor fixed it up there, and it required all of the panoply of government and local government, and it all came together under the auspices of the mayor to make the road crossing safe for the kids, because they have something that we go into in the book and explore in the book, something called collaborative leadership. We can't do collaborative leadership. We get into cost shifting and blame shifting. So when we talk about making decisions in communities, you have to change the structure of how those communities made. I mean, I led a local authority I was a councillor for 20 years. I was the chairman of the local health authority. You put those two together, you think I'd be able to achieve everything that God ever imagined for society. I achieved nothing because it was impossible. Funding was different, the tune was different, the marching was different, everything was different, couldn't do it. But if you got societies like this place in Spain where the mayor can say, do you know what, I think we should do something about these kids who are getting run over because of the mad tourists driving through, then you can do that kind of stuff. So benevis is in the book, and I'm quite keen on beneficism as a new ism, a beneficism.
Yeah, and I saw in the States way back when I was on the Treasury Select Committee in Pittsburgh, everything driven by a dynamic local mayor working collaboratively with wealthy philanthropists, world-class universities, but it was all locally driven, and they had the power and the ability to do it, and that's what we completely lack, I think, in this country. Could we move on?
Norman, can I ask you a question? You've seen these places working, and we've got mayors here, but they're usually sort of big conurbations. Do you think that there is an issue about size and traction to make mayors work with authorities, or do you think it can work with smaller authorities like I don't know, Norfolk or Surrey or something? I mean, can it work like that, do you think?
I totally believe it can work. I think Norfolk should have its elected person. There's someone you can then identify with, who you can hold accountable. This is not what any particular political party advocates, but I think that very clear accountability of having an elected person supported by a locally elected assembly of some sort, council, whatever you call it, is the way in which you shift power and responsibility. I think people have to be able to identify with the area that person represents. People identify with Norfolk. They identify usually with their county or with their larger urban area like Greater Manchester. So I think that's really important. But I want to just test a bit further with you all about the political choices and whether we could create a sort of set of propositions that you could sell to the public. Because, this government has opposed taking all sorts of steps that might have improved the public's health because of fear of being accused of being the nanny state, as it were. Do you think that it's possible, because political parties have to get elected, do you think it's possible to create a sort of manifesto of change which focuses on how we prevent ill health, maintain wellness, as you describe it, Roy, and which is politically popular?
Yes.
So go on, you go first, Roy.
I tell you why. Because whilst we were researching the book, Ed and I came across a YouGov survey, which was done, I think, it was only a couple of months ago. I can't remember what it was now, but the exact month. But it's a new survey. It's not old stuff. And YouGov asked the question: do you think that government should play a much bigger role in wellness? Well, they didn't talk about wellness, but in public health. I mean, should there be more legislation stuff around to stop, I don't know, smoking, or to change what's in food and all that kind of thing? It's a really interesting survey. We'll link to it in the book. And the answer was, and we were amazed, the answer was a resounding yes. The people who said yes, they should do a lot more, was a big number, and the people who said they should do more was an even bigger number. You put those two together, it was an overwhelming number of people who thought that the government should do more in legislating for healthier lifestyles. So I think that political thinking is out of date with the public mood.
And do you think, Roy, that you just ignore noises off from the Daily Mail or the Telegraph or whoever it might be, who might be arguing against moves of that sort?
Yes, I think if you've got the conviction as a politician that you're doing the greatest good for the greatest number, and you're doing it, clearly because you think it's right, then I think certainly people. First of all, I wouldn't be frightened of arguing my case for greater legislation, certainly amongst food, for example, prepackaged food, the things that Wendy was talking about, or legislate around that. They've done it with drinks, they can do it with food. And so I think, firstly, I'm reassured when Ed and I found this a survey, we kind of had a celebratory 3 cheers, because we felt that we are pushing at an open door. So yes, I think there's a political opportunity to look at this agenda with a fresh pair of eyes and come to the public with a new approach.
Wendy, you've had to get yourself elected several times. Mm-hmm. What's your perspective? Is this an agenda that we could sell to the public?
I think it very much is. And I think we start with a health in all policies approach, so that every single decision that's made by government or local councils looks at the health implications of this. And I mean, obviously, the first thing is to sort out the funding. Local government funding is completely broken, and we can't do anything much to help people without the funding to do it. So redistribution of funding first of all, and allowing councils and mayoral authorities to actually take the actions that they want to take, and stop having us bid for tiny amounts of money that has to be spent in a short time. But the next thing I think is to move to a community approach, and you can't keep telling people you've got to do this because it's better for your health. You have to work with the communities to actually find out what would work for them, what would make a difference for them, how would they find it easier to walk or exercise more, how would they find it easier to get good food, and we can do projects like that, making services very accessible. So I think there's a lot that governments can do, but there's also a lot that local authorities can do. And one interesting discussion that we had with Michael Marmot the other day was his Marmot cities and Marmot places, where basically councils and local authorities are committing themselves to follow his principles. And over the last 10 years, it does seem to have made a huge difference. So it just shows it can work.
Thank you. Now, Ed, do you think that Roy is potentially onto something as your co-author when he suggests that we could perhaps get rid of national insurance nationally and create instead a local tax of some sort? So a big reduction in national taxation, shift to the local level, giving the power then to the locality to use it in the way they see fit to create healthier communities.
Be careful how you answer this, Ed.
I'm watching very carefully.
I completely disagree. No, look. Let me give you a couple of thoughts. One, the brains trust of our nation does not reside in Westminster or Whitehall. It resides in our populations around the country, and that's where you start. Second thing is we need to invert the pyramid of control from an apex of central government down to our citizens, and turn it completely the other way up, and have our citizens driving a lot of activity collectively at the locality. And one of the things I've said to Roy a number of times is we do not have alignment of money with the activity and responsibility. So you have to align incentives and funding. And that requires a much more distributed funding philosophy and funding drive. You can't be doing what I see happen in all the government departments I've worked in, people dishing out penny packets of money for this, that, and the other, largely driven by politics of the moment. It doesn't work. And so, I sound frustrated, but I know there's another way here. And we need to get the next government to really push on with it.
And Ed, the critical question then is, could it be politically attractive, do you think? Because, we come back to this fact, parties have to get elected and to have to stay elected in order to implement the sort of changes that we're talking about. Could it appeal to the public?
Well, if you have the narrative which explains where we are as a nation, which is, shall we say, not in the best of fitness, health, and whatever, and what the trajectory is to get there, and how we would involve people in doing it, it's going to be a lot more better received than the current slam down of stuff that doesn't work and hasn't been proved to work. So I think we will. I mean, there's always the problem that 5 years of a government is inconsistent with proper investment, transforming society. I talked to Roy about double running costs needed to move from this structure to another structure. But you've got to start somewhere, because the trajectory that we are in at the moment is not a trajectory for improvement. It's a trajectory for continuing the downward spiral of a nation that has been great, but actually is now tired and worn. And you only have to do that by looking at our national infrastructure, whether it's water, whether it's transport, whether it's health, whether it's housing. Our infrastructure is decaying because we have not renewed it at the level we need. We've taken short-term activity at our peril, and we need to rebuild the fabric of our society, including our human society, not just our physical society.
So we need an age of renewal, both to improve the health and well-being of our communities, but also to make us economically successful again, I think is what you're saying. Roy, you look like you're ready to come in. You're waving your pen around.
I do. Well, I don't know what I'm just trying to. Smith is a very wicked person to work with, can I tell you? we have a real laugh, but it's not easy. I want you to think. Look, I mean, politicians right now look like our country. They look knackered and broken, don't they? I mean, the modern politics policies don't win elections anymore. It's people that do. People buy people first, and it's the same with politics. There isn't anybody, and I'm being blunt, I suppose, but there isn't anybody in the current raft of political leadership that inspires me at all to do anything, even get out and vote. So, I mean, I think if you're talking about an age of renewal, Norman, which is like a really big ticket item and goes, a bit beyond our four circles, but I suppose it plays into that. If we're looking at that, then we do need an age of political leadership. Now, if we look back over history, I mean, there will be a lot of people watching and listening to this that won't agree with me. But if you look over modern history, Margaret Thatcher was one of the big names that came in and changed things. Now, people say she changed it for the worst and people got blah, blah, but whatever it was, you cannot deny what happens in the ballot box, and people get voted for. The wheels may come off later, but that's where it started. You can't deny the fact that Tony Blair came in again with very much this kind of a personality issue, and you can argue that it all went wrong later on and blah blah blah. But if we're just looking at people to get elected, if you look at who those those people were, and then you try and name the people that went between Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, I can't remember who they were. John Major, I think, or somebody, I don't know. And what's happened since Blair? I mean, the whole wheels have come off. But what I'm saying is, where are the leaders? Where is the leadership that will inspire people?
And I mean, you've just used the word I was going to raise. Do we not need to inspire people, both by being honest about the scale of the challenges we face, which Ed, you articulated so clearly about the way in which we've declined as a country, as an economy, but also then give people hope that there is a vision of something better that we can aspire to. Is that what we need?
Yes, and the narrative is very simple, Norman, and you're right. It's a frank narrative that says, look, we've been through hell and back. We've got a war going on, we've had COVID, we've had Brexit, we've had austerity and all the rest of it, but we are made of better things. There is a better future if we can raise our eyes and do this, this, and this. Can't fix it, overnight. But we are better than this, and we can do better than this. But it needs someone with a personality to be able to say it, and people believe it. We've lost a narrative in politics. We have got policies, but we've lost the narrative.
Of course, you need the trust of the people to
yes.
to convince them as well. Wendy, what's your perspective? Do you think it's as big as Ed and Roy have said, that we need to level with people about the scale of the change that's needed, and then inspire people about the fact that it is achievable? Because I fundamentally believe that this is not something that's impossible to confront and to solve, but it requires absolute focus and determination, and critically political bravery. What's your perspective?
I would certainly agree that trust in politics has dropped to an all-time low. I think for all parties, we're finding that people just say the country is such a mess, we're not interested. But I'm not very keen on the idea of going back to a strong leader who's going to inspire us to do the right thing. I think we need to work from the other end and inspire the communities to take action for themselves. I mean, going back to Margaret Thatcher, the biggest crime I think she ever committed was to make people believe it's respectable to be selfish. And everything that happens is, well, what's in it for me? How do I benefit? And we've not lost the idea of how does the community benefit? So I think we need to work from the community upwards. Yes, inspire people with some ideas, but say, you can do it. We will give you the means to do it for yourselves. And I think we could move a lot further than that, rather than trying to impose results.
But I think, would you agree with Ed in particular, when we say that we need community it needs to be community upwards, we need to give communities the power to affect the change?
Definitely, yes. Yeah, the power and the money.
Can I just say, Norman, I mean, I don't want Wendy to run away with the wrong idea about what I've said. I tried to make it clear. I wasn't talking about the policies of these people. I was talking about the impact that their personalities and their approach had in winning elections. And if you look again, if you look at George Galloway, what's just happened in Rochester, isn't it?
Rochdale.
Rochdale. Yeah. If you look what's happened there, I mean, you could. And I'm not in any way endorsing him, but if you look at what he did to get elected, he got elected on a maternity service in a town, because he said, what's the point of being from a town if you can't be born in the town? The maternity services. He's campaigning for Primark to open a shop there because it's jobs and it's cheap clothing. And there was another thing which was more.
Gaza was pretty significant.
Sorry, yes, it was. Sorry, yeah. It was the Gaza issue, which of course is a big issue in that area. But so I'm not endorsing him. But what I'm saying is that he has the ability to touch people's lives, and he got elected. The Thatcher story is a story of touching people's lives. Blair, it's a story of touching people's lives. And we've lost the knack of touching people's lives because we don't have a narrative. What is the 2024 narrative? I have no idea what it is.
Well, it seems to me what we're after is a progressive force that actually inspires people to rise to the scale of the challenge, but an agenda of change that ultimately makes people's lives better, liberates people, as Michael Marmot talked about, Wendy quoted earlier, and that makes the country more economically successful and, I would say, sustainable as well, given the enormous challenge we face of climate change. But I think, I suspect we're all agreed, are we not? I'd love to get your reaction to that. We're agreed that there is out there, if we can define it more clearly, an agenda that could be popular with people and that could result in an age of renewal, as we say, which gives this country and its population hope again that we can become a successful society and economy through empowerment of people and communities. Is that, do we agree with that, Ed?
No, I don't. I think it's too complicated. I think I'd say, vote for me. I'll make sure you got a job and it's well paid. And all that ethereal stuff about, all the rest is all lovely, but I don't know. I can't even remember what you said. Vote for me. Make sure you got a job and it's well paid.
And you keep it as simple as that. Ed?
I suspect we'll have 2 chapters to end our book. Right?
2 alternative courses, divergent courses.
Because I do think we need to have the narrative which sets it out, and I do think we need to move away from. All the best global corporations that I've been involved in over 40 years have a very small but essential role at the centre.
Yeah,
and they leverage the ecosystem that they are responsible for. We do not have that in the politics of this country, and we need to get there. So that's the journey I want to see us on before I shuffle off my physical appearance on this land.
And now you can
Wendy,
see why we're such a good pair at writing books, can't you? Because
I love
sense and I do the typing. Yeah,
I love the tension that's inherent in the project here. Wendy, I suspect you would sign up to what Ed is talking about as well.
Very much so, and not so much, I'm afraid, the alternative option.
We have to.
An honest politician can't say, I will get you a job that's well paid. It takes a lot more than that. And it's not just a job people need, it's housing, it's access to green space, it's a decent environment, clean air, access to mental health services, all the things that make a good community life and achieve Michael Marmot's ambition. So, yes, I prefer your narrative, I have to say, Norman. Yes, it's a bit more complicated, but I think we can sell it.
But you have to recognise, Wendy, that Roy is a provocateur, and actually, his message that it has to be simple, and that we have to, convey our prospectus in a very simple, straightforward way, is a really important message, because so often this is where I think progressives fall down, that you've got a populist on one side with a very simple message, sort of trading simple solutions to complex problems, and you have progressives who go into all the detail. It's far too nuanced, and the public chooses the populist. So we've got to find simple ways of conveying hope critically, that we can be great again in a very positive way.
That sounds like Trump, isn't it? Let's make America great again. And what happened? He got elected.
Yeah, well, we need a progressive alternative to that to give people.
There's a saying, isn't it? Why does the devil always have the best tunes?
I know. That's what we're up against. Yeah. But that's also why it's so important that we find ways of conveying this message in a way that is compelling to people.
Yeah, we certainly can't ask our communities to take back control.
Let's get some final thoughts. Ed, any closing thoughts from you before we finish?
I'm a father and a grandfather, and I think what's really, really important for me, looking at it at that level, is where we're going to be in 15 years, where we're going to be in 25 years, not where we're going to be in 3 or 4. We have to have a very, very long-term sustainable change, because forces are against us, but actually our children and our children's children and other people's children and children are lifeblood of our nation. So let's do it. That's, very personal view, but let's do it.
Yeah, brilliant. Call for action. Roy?
It's the four things, I'm looking for wellness. I'd like to do wellness. It's not public health. It's our four things. It's benign legislation, supported technologies, public acceptance, and collaborative leadership. And I agree with Ed. Shove it down to the smallest level that can make it work.
Well, it looks like you've got a single chapter to end your book after all.
No, that's no good, is it? I'm going to have a stiff word with my co-author.
Wendy, the final word to you. Any thoughts?
I think we have to have a combination of government action to deal with the things that they have to deal with. So the legislation on smoking, on vapes, on good quality food, the sort of things that can make a big difference, but then allow the local authorities and the local communities the power and the money to make the decisions, because they know what needs to be done and they can do it if they're allowed to do so.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you all so much. Great discussion.